She's just a placeholder, Serafina. You know that. The deep, gravelly voice of Alpha King Cassian bled through the heavy mahogany doors of the study, freezing Lisa in the darkened hallway. A terribly boring one, Serafina purred, the clinking of crystal glasses echoing like shattering ice. She looks at you like a lost puppy. It's pathetic, Cassian. Does she honestly think a king could ever truly mate a weak, human-blooded stray? A low, dark chuckle rumbled from Cassian's chest, a sound Lisa used to seek out for comfort. Now, it felt like a serrated blade twisting in her ribs. Let her play house a little longer? Cassian dismissed coldly. Once the southern territories concede, I'll strip her of the title. You'll have your crown. Silence can be louder than a scream. As Lisa stood in the opulent, dimly lit corridor of the royal estate, the absolute silence ringing in her own ears was deafening. She didn't gasp. She didn't drop the tray of chamomile tea she had meticulously brewed for the man she thought loved her. Her hands, surprisingly steady, simply lowered the silver tray onto a nearby marble console table. The porcelain cup rattled faintly against the saucer, a microscopic tremor that was the only outward betrayal of the tectonic plates shifting and collapsing inside her soul. 3 years. She had spent 3 years fighting for a place in a world that viewed her human bloodline as a contagion. She had endured the sneers of the high-born wolves, the whispers in the courtyards, and the grueling physical training to prove she was worthy of standing beside the Alpha King. And through it all, Cassian's hand on the small of her back had been her anchor. They don't see what I see, he used to whisper in the dark. Now she knew the truth. He saw a pawn, a temporary shield to pacify the traditionalists until his political maneuvering was complete. Lisa turned away from the study doors. She didn't run. Running was for prey, and in this moment, a cold, hard numbness was crystallizing in her veins, burning away the gentle, accommodating woman she had forced herself to become. She walked back to the master suite, her bare feet making no sound against the imported Persian rugs. The bedroom was a monument to Cassian's wealth and power. Vaulted ceilings, dark velvet curtains, and a massive 4-poster bed that smelled overwhelmingly of cedar, rain, and him. It was a scent that had once lulled her into the deepest sleeps. Tonight, it made her stomach churn with violent nausea. She walked straight to the expansive walk-in closet. The motion sensor lights flickered on, illuminating rows upon rows of designer gowns, tailored suits, and silk loungewear. All of it chosen by Cassian stylists. All of it armor, meant to disguise her origins. Lisa reached up and unzipped the back of the emerald silk dress she was wearing. It pooled around her ankles like shed snake skin. She stepped out of it, leaving it on the plush carpet. She bypassed the rows of expensive garments and moved to the very back of the closet, pulling out a battered cardboard box she had kept hidden beneath a pile of winter blankets. Inside were the clothes she had arrived in 3 years ago, before Cassian's royal guards had found her half-frozen near the border. A pair of faded, reinforced denim jeans, a thermal long-sleeve shirt, a worn leather jacket that still smelled faintly of motor oil from her days working at a human garage. She dressed quickly, the rough fabric scratching against skin that had grown far too accustomed to cashmere. It felt grounding. It felt real. Next, she walked to the vanity mirror. She stared at the woman in the reflection. Pale skin, dark eyes that usually held a soft, pleading warmth, now flat and obsidian. Her fingers went to her neck, unclasping the diamond teardrop pendant Cassian had given her for their first anniversary. It clattered against the glass tabletop. Her ears were stripped of their white gold studs. Finally, she looked down at her left hand. The heavy, silver ring bearing the royal crest of the Northern Pack rested on her index finger. It was the mark of the Alpha's chosen, not a mate's mark. Cassian had always claimed his wolf was too volatile to finalize the bite just yet. Another lie. Lisa pulled the ring off. The skin beneath was pale and indented, a physical phantom of the chain that had bound her. She walked to the small wall safe beside the bed, punched in the code, Cassian's birth date, another pathetic testament to her devotion, and placed the ring perfectly in the center of the empty metal shelf. She closed the heavy steel door, spinning the dial. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't take a single cent of the pack's money, nor the gilded credit cards in her name. If she took anything, they could track her. If she took anything, it meant she still needed him. Lisa grabbed a plain black beanie, pulling it down over her hair, and slipped into her old, scuffed combat boots. She looked around the lavish bedroom one last time. There were no tears. The betrayal was too absolute, too deeply carved into her bones to produce something as trivial as crying. She was leaving with exactly what she had brought into this kingdom, nothing but herself. The digital clock on the bedside table read 2:14 a.m. The estate was locked down in its nocturnal rhythm. To the outside world, Cassian's fortress was impenetrable, guarded by elite wolf shifters whose senses could detect a heartbeat through concrete. But Lisa had spent 3 years learning the spaces between their senses. She knew the blind spots. She knew that the guards relied entirely on smell and sound, often neglecting the simple human art of looking up. She slipped out the secondary servant's door at the back of the kitchen, stepping into the biting chill of the night air. A thick, rolling fog was coming off the nearby mountains, a stroke of pure luck. It would dampen her scent and obscure the security cameras dotting the perimeter wall. Lisa pressed herself against the cold stone of the estate's exterior, moving in agonizingly slow increments. Every step was calculated, placing her boots precisely on the mossy patches of the courtyard where the gravel wouldn't crunch. She navigated the labyrinth of the royal gardens, bypassing the illuminated fountains and sticking to the dense, sprawling shadows of the ancient oak trees. Her heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against her ribs, but her mind was terrifyingly clear. The emotional shock had receded, leaving behind a razor-sharp survival instinct. She reached the edge of the manicured grounds where the tree line of the wild forest began. This was the most dangerous part. The boundary was patrolled by pairs of sentries every 15 minutes. Lisa crouched behind a marble statue of a past alpha, holding her breath as the crunch of heavy boots approached. 2 guards materialized from the fog. She recognized the scent of the nearest one, pine and wet earth. Marcus, a young, scarred guard who usually worked the daytime gates. Lisa used to bring him leftover pastries from the royal kitchens when Cassian wasn't looking. She had sat with him when he received news of his sister's illness, holding his massive, clawed hand in her small human ones. The wind shifted. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. His head snapped toward the statue, his nostrils flaring. The second guard, a brute named Thorn, grunted. "What is it?" "Scent," Marcus rumbled, his glowing amber eyes piercing the gloom. He took a slow, deliberate step toward Lisa's hiding place. Lisa froze, her hand instinctively going to the small silver knife she had pocketed from the kitchen. It wouldn't do much against a fully shifted wolf, but she wouldn't be dragged back to Cassian's study like a stray dog. Marcus rounded the statue. He looked down. For a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity, Marcus and Lisa locked eyes. He saw her worn clothes. He saw the absence of the royal crest on her finger. He saw the cold, desperate finality in her dark eyes. Lisa didn't plead. She didn't move. She simply stared back at him, holding the gaze of a predator, daring him to seal her fate. Marcus's jaw tightened. A complex wave of emotion, surprise, pity, and a profound, silent understanding washed over his rugged face. He knew what Cassian was. The whole pack knew, even if they never dared speak it aloud. Marcus turned his head sharply, staring off into the dense woods to the east. "Fox?" Marcus lied, his voice loud and steady. "Must have slipped under the outer fence. Let's keep moving, Thorn. I want to finish this rotation." Thorn grumbled in agreement, and the two guards continued their march, their heavy footsteps fading into the fog. Lisa let out a long, shaky exhale, her knees trembling slightly. She didn't waste time analyzing Marcus's mercy. She sprinted. She ran into the unforgiving embrace of the dark forest, her boots tearing through underbrush and leaping over rotting logs. 10 minutes later, she hit the invisible, crackling energy of the pack ward. It was a barrier tied to the Alpha's blood, designed to keep enemies out and this pack within. Because she wore Cassian's mark, she was tied to it. Lisa took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and stepped through. The physical sensation of the pack bond tearing was indescribable. It felt as though a hot iron hook, buried deep in her chest, was violently ripped out. A searing, blinding pain arched up her spine, forcing a silent, choked gasp from her throat. She stumbled, falling hard onto the wet dirt on the other side of the ward, scraping her hands raw. She lay there for a moment, gasping for air, waiting for the sirens to blare. But the night remained silent. The ward hadn't registered an intrusion. It had simply registered a disconnection. To the magic of the border, the Luna hadn't crossed. A ghost had simply ceased to exist. Lisa pushed herself up, wiping the mud from her palms. She turned her back on the towering silhouette of the Alpha's estate, pulling the collar of her worn jacket up against the wind, and began the long walk toward the human city lights, glowing faintly on the horizon. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet drapes of the master suite, casting long, dusty shafts of light across the ruined bedsheets. Alpha King Cassian stretched, his massive, heavily muscled arms flexing as a deep groan vibrated in his chest. He reached out blindly to the left side of the mattress, expecting the familiar, soft warmth of Lisa's skin. His hand met cold, crisp linen. Cassian cracked an eye open, squinting against the light. The spot beside him was empty. It wasn't entirely unusual. Lisa was an early riser, often slipping out to the gardens to read or heading to the kitchens to interfere with the chef's meticulously planned menus. It was one of her quaint, annoying human habits he had planned to train out of her eventually. He sat up, running a hand through his dark, tousled hair. He felt a phantom ache in his chest, a dull, throbbing sensation he couldn't quite place. He dismissed it as a residual ache from yesterday's grueling sparring session with the guard captains. Rolling out of bed, Cassian walked to the adjoining master bathroom. "Lisa," he called out, his authoritative voice echoing off the marble tile. "Have them send up black coffee. And tell the tailor I need the charcoal suit for the council meeting today." Only the hum of the central air conditioning answered him. Frowning, he walked back into the bedroom. A faint prickle of irritation began to itch at the back of his neck. He didn't like repeating himself. He threw on a pair of dark sweatpants and walked out into the corridor. The estate was buzzing with morning activity. Servants bowed their heads respectfully as he passed, their eyes glued to the floor. Cassian stalked down the grand staircase, his heavy footsteps commanding absolute silence in his wake. He found Serafina in the sunroom, lounging on a chaise, sipping a mimosa. She looked stunning, her golden hair perfectly styled, her predatory green eyes sharp and calculating. She wore a silk robe that left very little to the imagination. "Good morning, Your Majesty," she purred, tracing the rim of her glass with a manicured fingernail. "You look tense. Did your little pet keep you up crying again?" Cassian ignored the jab, though his jaw ticked. "Have you seen Lisa?" Serafina rolled her eyes, taking a delicate sip. "Why would I keep track of the human? Last I saw her, she was hovering near the study last night, probably eavesdropping like a frightened mouse." Cassian froze. The memory of last night's conversation hit him like a physical blow. "She's just a placeholder. I'll strip her of the title." The dull ache in his chest suddenly flared into a sharp, icy spike of alarm. He didn't say a word to Serafina. He turned on his heel and moved, his pace accelerating from a walk to a predatory sprint. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his chest heaving, his wolf scratching furiously at the back of his mind, demanding to be let out. He burst through the doors of the master suite, his golden eyes scanning the room frantically. "Lisa!" he roared, the alpha command lacing his voice, a sound that would force any wolf in the pack to their knees. Nothing. The air felt dead. Cassian stormed into the walk-in closet. He stopped dead. At first glance, everything was perfect. The gowns were lined up, the shoes were displayed on their racks, the jewelry boxes were neatly stacked. But then he saw it. The emerald silk dress she had been wearing yesterday, pooled discarded on the floor like trash. He moved to her vanity. Her favorite teardrop pendant lay abandoned on the glass. Panic, raw and unadulterated, finally broke through his arrogant exterior. He ripped open the wall safe. There, sitting perfectly in the center, glinting mockingly in the overhead light, was the heavy silver crest ring. Cassian stared at it, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and picked up the ring. It was ice cold. He closed his eyes and reached inward, searching for the fragile, golden thread of the bond that connected him to her. For 3 years, it had been a soft, humming presence in his mind, a tether he had taken entirely for granted. He reached for it. He grasped at it. It was gone. Not frayed, not distant. Gone, severed at the root. A deafening roar ripped from Cassian's throat, shattering the vanity mirror into 1,000 jagged pieces. The illusion of his control shattered right along with it. She hadn't thrown a tantrum. She hadn't run to the gardens to cry. She had packed nothing, and she had vanished. 3 weeks. That was how long it took for the ghost pains in Lisa's chest to subside into a dull, manageable ache. It felt like breathing with a fractured rib. A constant, sharp reminder of the invisible tether she had violently severed. She was currently lying on a grease-stained creeper, staring up at the rusted underbelly of a 1998 Ford pickup. The smell of the human world was aggressive. Motor oil, stale black coffee, and the metallic tang of ozone from the welding torch in the corner of the garage. It was a chaotic, dirty symphony of scents, and she welcomed it. It drowned out the phantom smells of cedar and rain that still tried to haunt her sleep. "Hey, Elena." The gruff voice of old Mac, the shop owner, echoed over the grind of machinery. "You got that transmission fluid flushed yet?" "Give me 2 minutes, Mac," Lisa called back, her voice slightly muffled by the metal chassis. Elena. It was the name of her late mother, and the only alias she felt comfortable wearing. She wrenched a stubborn bolt loose, her knuckles scraping against the hot metal. She didn't flinch. Over the last 21 days, her body had begun to recalibrate. The soft, pampered skin of the Northern Pack's resident human was gone, replaced by calluses and grease-stained fingernails. She worked 10-hour shifts, slept on a lumpy mattress in the small apartment above the garage, and paid for everything in untraceable cash. Oak Haven was a miserable little border town, completely devoid of shifter politics, which made it the perfect sanctuary. But as she wiped her forehead with the back of a dirty rag, a strange sensation prickled at the base of her skull. Before her time at the estate, Lisa would have ignored it as a draft. Now, her instincts were different. 3 years of living surrounded by apex predators had altered her. Cassian had always claimed she was completely human, unaffected by his wolf's aura. But as she slid out from under the truck and stood up, she realized that was another lie. Her hearing had become uncomfortably sharp. She could hear the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of a leaky faucet 3 bays over. She could hear the erratic, fluttering heartbeat of a sparrow perched on the rafters. And right now, she could hear the heavy, synchronized purr of a high-end engine pulling into the gravel lot out front. Lisa froze, wiping her hands on her shop rag. Old Mac was in the office, arguing on the phone with a parts supplier. The garage was otherwise empty. Through the frosted, dirt-caked window of the bay door, she watched a sleek, midnight black SUV park near the gas pumps. It wasn't a local vehicle. It was military-grade, armored, with tinted windows that absorbed the afternoon sun. Her heart kicked into a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Cassian. She instinctively backed away, her hand reaching for the heavy steel crowbar resting on the nearest workbench. If it was the Northern King's Royal Guard, they would flood the building in seconds. They wouldn't ask questions. They would drag her back by her hair if they had to. But as the driver's side door opened, the wind shifted, blowing through the open garage doors. Lisa paused, her grip on the crowbar tightening. The scent wasn't pine or snow or Cassian's intoxicating cedar. It was unfamiliar. It smelled of copper, dry ash, and something sharp, like cracked flint. A shifter, but not from the north. A tall man stepped out of the SUV. He wore dark jeans and a fitted black Henley that did nothing to hide the lethal, coiled muscle of his frame. His hair was a chaotic mop of dark curls, and his eyes, even from 30 yards away, burned with a striking, unnatural amber hue. He didn't walk toward the convenience store. He turned his head slowly, his nostrils flaring as he took in the scent of the dusty town. Then, with terrifying precision, his gaze locked onto the open bay door of the garage. Right onto the shadows where Lisa was standing, he started walking toward her. 400 miles north, the royal study of the Alpha King looked like the epicenter of a localized hurricane. The heavy mahogany desk had been violently cleaved in two, its polished surface splintered and ruined. Antique books were scattered across the Persian rugs, and the crystal decanters that Seraphina so loved clinking together had been smashed against the stone fireplace, leaving the room reeking of aged bourbon and desperation. Cassian stood in the center of the wreckage, his chest heaving, his eyes entirely black. His wolf was right at the surface, clawing furiously against the confines of his human skin, demanding blood, demanding her. "This is getting pathetic, Cassian." Seraphina stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her beautiful face twisted into a sneer of genuine disgust. "You canceled the summit with the Southern Territories. Again. The elders are whispering. You are acting like a feral pup over a stray human who finally had the sense to run away." Cassian moved so fast, the human eye couldn't have tracked him. In a fraction of a second, his hand was wrapped around Seraphina's throat, pinning her against the heavy oak doorframe. He didn't squeeze enough to crush her windpipe, but enough to make her gasp in genuine terror. "Do not speak of her," Cassian snarled, his voice distorted by the guttural growl of his beast. "You don't know anything. I know, You're ruining your crown." Serafina choked out, her hands clawing futilely at his iron grip. Cassian released her, stepping back as if her touch burned him. She crumpled coughing to the floor. 3 weeks ago, he would have admired her ruthlessness. Now, looking at her, all he felt was a sickening wave of nausea. She was the catalyst, but the guilt was entirely his own. "She's just a placeholder." The words echoed in his mind, torturing him every time he closed his eyes. He hadn't realized the truth until the bond was severed. His wolf hadn't been volatile because it rejected Lisa. It had been volatile because Cassian, in his political arrogance, had refused to fully claim her. His beast had chosen the human, recognized her soul as its perfect counterweight, and Cassian had forced it to treat her like a dirty secret. Now, the wolf was starving, turning inward, tearing Cassian's sanity apart piece by piece. The study door creaked open further, and Elias, his beta, stepped in carefully, sidestepping Serafina on the floor. Elias's face was grim. "Alpha," Elias said quietly, his eyes assessing the ruined room. "We found something." Cassian's head snapped up. "Where?" "The eastern perimeter, the night she left." Elias hesitated. "I interrogated the night watch again, Thorn and Marcus." "Bring them," Cassian commanded, his voice shaking the glass in the windows. "I only brought Marcus," Elias replied. He stepped aside, and 2 guards dragged a heavily beaten Marcus into the room, forcing him to his knees amidst the shattered glass. Marcus's face was bruised, his lips split, but his eyes were defiant. Cassian stalked toward the kneeling guard. "You lied to me," Cassian whispered, the quiet tone far more terrifying than his roar. "You said you smelled a fox." Marcus looked up at his king. He didn't tremble. "I did, Alpha. I smelled a fox. And I saw a woman who looked like she was walking to her own execution. I chose not to be the headsman." "She is your Luna," Cassian roared, the force of his Alpha command bringing Elias to his knees as well. Marcus spat a mouthful of blood onto the rug. "With all due respect, my king, she was never our Luna. You made sure the whole pack knew that. You let the highborn mock her. You let her." Marcus jutted his chin toward Serafina, who was still clutching her throat. "Insult her in her own home. If she was our Luna, you should have treated her like one." The words hit Cassian with the force of a freight train. The absolute, undeniable truth of it paralyzed him. He raised a hand, his claws fully extended, ready to tear Marcus's throat out for the insubordination. But the strike never came. Cassian's hand dropped. His shoulders slumped, the monstrous, terrifying Alpha suddenly looking utterly broken. "Where did she go, Marcus?" Cassian asked, his voice cracking, sounding terribly human. "Please." "I don't know," Marcus said softly. "But wherever she is, Alpha, leave her be. You've done enough." Lisa didn't run. If the man walking toward her was a shifter, running would immediately trigger his predatory instinct to chase. She stood her ground, her back straight, her fingers wrapped tight around the cold, textured steel of the crowbar behind her back. The man stopped precisely at the threshold of the garage bay. Up close, his eyes were even more striking, a molten gold that seemed to trap the ambient light. He looked around the dirty shop, his nose twitching slightly at the overwhelming smell of chemicals, before his gaze settled heavily on her. "Old Mac around?" His voice was smooth, a dark baritone that lacked the gravelly, commanding edge of Cassian's, but held an entirely different kind of danger. It was the voice of a man used to charming his way out of a kill. "He's busy," Lisa said, keeping her tone flat, bored. "Can I help you?" The man tilted his head, studying her. His eyes flicked from her grease-smudged face to the collar of her oversized shirt, and finally, to her left hand, which was gripping the crowbar behind her. "You're a long way from the icy peaks of the north, aren't you?" he asked casually, pulling a silver coin from his pocket and rolling it over his knuckles. Lisa's blood ran ice cold. Her heart slammed against her ribs, but she forced her breathing to remain slow and measured. "I think you have the wrong shop," she said, taking a subtle half-step backward, ensuring her path to the side exit was clear. "We just fix cars here." The man chuckled. It was a rich, warm sound that completely contradicted the lethal stillness of his posture. "I have an excellent nose, sweetheart. Even under 5 layers of 10W30 motor oil, I can smell the residue of an Alpha King's broken ward on your skin. It smells like burnt sugar and regret." He stepped over the threshold, officially entering her territory. "You're the human. The little pet Cassian kept hidden away." Lisa brought the crowbar out from behind her back, letting the heavy steel rest against her thigh. She didn't raise it aggressively, but the message was clear. "Who are you?" "Kale," he offered, executing a mocking, theatrical bow. "Beta of the Southern Pack. You know, the pack your beloved king was supposed to sign a historic treaty with 2 weeks ago." Lisa narrowed her eyes. "I don't care about shifter politics anymore, Kale, and I don't belong to Cassian." "Oh, I know." Kyle smiled, showing a flash of unnervingly sharp canines. "The whole shifter world knows. Cassian completely lost his mind at the summit, paced the room like a rabid dog, snapped at our alpha, and walked out without signing the accord. Word is, he's tearing his own territories apart looking for a ghost." A strange, complex pang hit Lisa's chest at the news. Cassian was looking for her? It didn't make sense. He had called her a placeholder. He had been ready to discard her for Serafina. "If you're here to drag me back for a bounty," Lisa said, her voice dropping into a dangerous, low octave she didn't know she possessed, "you're going to need a lot more than a silver coin. I'm not a pet anymore." Kyle stopped rolling the coin. He looked at the crowbar, then back up to her eyes, his expression shifting from amusement to genuine respect. "Drag you back?" Kale laughed softly. "Darling, Cassian's instability is the best thing that's happened to the South in a century. Why would I fix his broken heart?" He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "I didn't track you down to return you. I tracked you down because a human who can silently bypass the Northern King's royal guard, break an Alpha's blood ward, and vanish without a trace is incredibly fascinating to my Alpha. I'm not interested in trading one cage for another." Lisa spat. "Not a cage," Kyle said, his golden eyes locking onto hers with intense sincerity. "A sanctuary. Cassian's hounds will find this town eventually. He's expanding his search grid. When he finds you, he won't let you out of his sight again. But if you come to the south, you fall under our Alpha's protection. Cassian cannot cross our borders without starting a full-scale war." Lisa stared at him, the heavy silence of the garage pressing in on them. Outside, the sky was beginning to bruise with the colors of twilight. "Why?" Lisa demanded. "Well, what do you get out of protecting a weak human?" Kyle smiled, a sharp, predatory grin that sent a shiver down her spine. "Because having the Northern King's true-mate willingly living in our territory is the ultimate leverage." Lisa's breath hitched. "His... what?" "Oh." Kyle's eyebrows shot up in feigned surprise. "He never told you?" "Cassian didn't mark you because his wolf was volatile, Elena. He didn't mark you because his wolf had already recognized you as his destined mate, and the political backlash of a human Luna terrified his human ego." The crowbar slipped slightly in her sweaty palm. The tectonic plates of her reality shifted once again. But this time, Lisa didn't let herself fall. "I'll need 10 minutes to pack my tools," she said coldly. The southern pack territory was a stark, jarring contrast to the icy, towering pines of the north. Here the air was thick with humidity, smelling of Spanish moss, damp earth, and the sharp tang of the encroaching ocean. The southern compound was less of a traditional castle and more of a sprawling, heavily fortified modern estate hidden deep within the bayous. Lisa sat in the back of the armored SUV, her duffel bag of tools resting heavily against her boots. Kyle had been quiet for the last 3 hours of the drive, his golden eyes occasionally flicking to her through the rearview mirror. He was assessing her, trying to measure the breaking point of the human who had humiliated an alpha king. He would find no fractures today. The revelation of the mate bond hadn't broken Lisa. It had galvanized her. It transmuted her lingering sorrow into a cold, hardened armor. Cassian hadn't just been a coward politically. He had betrayed the very magic his species worshipped, all to save face. The SUV rolled to a halt in a sun-drenched courtyard. Waiting on the sprawling veranda was Alpha Silas. He was older than Cassian, with silver threading his dark hair and a network of vicious scars mapping his forearms. He radiated a lazy, dangerous power, like a coiled rattlesnake basking in the sun. "Welcome to the South, Elena," Silas drawled as Lisa stepped out of the vehicle, intentionally using her alias. He didn't bow. He didn't offer a hand. He merely looked her up and down with calculating precision. "You're smaller than the rumors suggested. And you're exactly as Cale described," Lisa replied, her voice steady, refusing to drop her gaze. It was a monumental risk to look an alpha in the eye, but she was done playing by shifter rules. "An opportunist." A low rumble of warning echoed from the guards flanking the porch, but Silas merely threw his head back and laughed. It was a harsh, scraping sound. "I like her. She has a spine. Something your former king apparently lacked." Silas stepped down from the veranda, his movements fluid. "You understand your position here? You are a guest, but you are also a shield. Cassian will inevitably track Cale's scent. When he comes to my border, your presence will be the leverage I use to extract the trade concessions he denied me." "I understand," Lisa said, gripping the strap of her tool bag. "But I have conditions of my own." Silas raised an eyebrow, genuinely amused. "Do you? A human making demands in a wolf's den?" "I am not a prisoner, and I will not be kept in a gilded cage ever again," Lisa stated, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "I work for my keep. I saw your motor pool on the way in. It's a mess. 3 of your perimeter patrol vehicles are running on blown shocks, and the exhaust on this SUV implies a failing catalytic converter. I am your new lead mechanic. I get my own quarters, my own tools, and I answer to no one regarding my time unless the pack is under attack." Silas stared at her, the amusement slowly fading into a look of profound, reassessing respect. He looked at Cale, who merely gave a slight, impressed shrug. "You have yourself a garage, Elena," Silas murmured. Meanwhile, 400 miles away, the temperature in the northern stronghold had plummeted to a suffocating frost. Cassian sat in the ruined husk of his study, his head buried in his hands. The heavy oak doors burst open, the wood splintering off the hinges. Elias rushed in, his breath pluming in the unnaturally cold air of the room. "We found her," Elias panted, his face pale. Cassian was on his feet in a microsecond, his eyes flashing to the terrifying, solid black of his wolf. "Where?" "Oakhaven, a human town near the border." Elias swallowed hard, dreading the next words. But she's not there anymore, Alpha. The scouts found tire tracks and a scent trail. Southern pack. Kyle was there. They took her across the southern border. The silence that followed was apocalyptic. It wasn't the explosive rage of a man scorned. It was the terrifying, apocalyptic stillness of a predator that had just found its target. The air pressure in the room dropped so drastically that the remaining glass panes in the windows cracked. "Mobilize the vanguard," Cassian commanded, his voice devoid of any human inflection. "Every combat-ready wolf. We march on the south." "Alpha, you can't," Elias pleaded, stepping in front of his king. "Crossing the border with an army is an act of war. The council will strip you of your crown. Silas will slaughter our front line." Cassian grabbed Elias by the tactical vest, lifting the massive beta off the ground effortlessly. "I don't care about the crown," Cassian snarled, his fangs fully descended. "I don't care about the council. They have my mate, and I will burn the entire southern hemisphere to ash to get her back." The torrential downpour felt like the sky itself was trying to wash away the sins of the earth. The southern border was a desolate stretch of muddy swampland, bisected by a rusted wire fence that represented decades of fragile peace. Today, that peace was a breath away from shattering. On the northern side of the fence stood Cassian. He was a terrifying sight. Stripped of his tailored suits and royal regalia, he wore dark tactical gear, soaked through by the rain. His army, 200 elite northern wolves, stood in absolute disciplined silence behind him, their eyes glowing ominously in the gloom. But Cassian looked hollowed out. His skin was pale, his cheekbones sharp, the agonizing withdrawal of the severed mate bond eating him alive from the inside. On the southern side stood Silas, flanked by Kale and a smaller, heavily armed contingent of southern wolves. Silas looked entirely unbothered by the rain, holding a massive black umbrella. "You're trespassing, Cassian," Silas called out over the roar of the thunder. "Take one more step, and the treaty is void." "Bring her out, Silas," Cassian roared, his voice cutting through the storm, heavy with the alpha compulsion that made the younger southern wolves whimper and step back. "Hand her over, and I'll let you keep your miserable swamps." Silas chuckled, a dark sound. "I didn't steal anything from you, Cassian. I merely offered shelter to a woman who realized she was sleeping with a coward." Cassian lunged toward the fence, his hands gripping the rusted wire, the metal groaning under his supernatural strength. "She is my mate. You have no right." "I have every right." The voice wasn't loud. It wasn't laced with supernatural command or predatory growls. But it stopped Cassian's heart entirely. The ranks of the southern wolves parted. Lisa walked forward through the mud. She held no umbrella. The heavy rain plastered her hair to her skull and soaked through her thick mechanic's jumpsuit. Her hands were stained with black grease. She looked tired, weathered, and utterly magnificent. Cassian's breath hitched. The physical pain in his chest vanished for a fleeting second, replaced by a desperate, agonizing surge of hope. His wolf howled in his mind, thrashing against its cage, demanding to break through the fence and claim what was theirs. "Lisa," Cassian breathed, his voice cracking, shedding every ounce of his regal authority. He fell to his knees in the mud, his hands still gripping the wire fence. "Lisa, please." Lisa stopped 10 feet from the fence. She looked down at the Alpha King, the man who had commanded her heart for 3 years. She saw his devastation. She saw the truth of the mate bond shining in his desperate black eyes. "Don't call me that," she said, her voice eerily calm, carrying perfectly over the rain. "Lisa died the night she listened to you discuss her obsolescence with your mistress." Cassian flinched as if she had shot him. I was a fool, he begged, the tears mixing with the rain on his face. I was trying to protect my political standing. I was afraid of the council, afraid of what they would do to a human Luna. I lied to you. I lied to myself. But the bond is real, Lisa. I am dying without you. You weren't protecting me, Lisa stated coldly. You were protecting your pride. If you truly believed I was your mate, you would have torn the throat out of anyone who dared to question my place beside you. Instead, you hid me. You made me feel small. You let me believe I was a temporary fixture. I will fix it, Cassian shouted, pressing his face against the wire. Behind him, the Northern Army watched in stunned silence. Their invincible, stoic king was groveling in the mud for a human. I will crown you today. In front of both packs. I will exile Serafina. I will burn the old laws. Just come back to me. Please, mate. The pain. I can't survive it. Lisa stared at him. For a moment, a heavy silence fell over the swamp, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain. The mate bond, even severed, hummed a faint, tragic melody in the air between them. I know the pain, Cassian, Lisa said softly. I felt it every single day I stood beside you, knowing I would never be enough for your ego. Lisa, I command you as your alpha, Cassian began, a sliver of desperation driving him to his old toxic habits. I have no alpha. Lisa's voice cracked like a whip, startling even Silas. She took a step closer to the fence, her dark eyes burning with an intense human fire that rivaled any shifter's glow. Your magic doesn't work on me anymore, Cassian. You broke the bond the moment you called me a placeholder. I just finalized the paperwork. Cassian shook his head violently. No, it's impossible. A human cannot reject a true mate. It will kill us both. I'm not dying, Lisa said, gesturing to her grease-stained clothes. I'm breathing. I'm working. I'm sleeping without waiting for you to sneak into my bed after you've appeased your council. I am more alive right now than I ever was in your sterile golden cage. She reached into the pocket of her jumpsuit. Slowly, she pulled out a small velvet pouch she had kept with her since leaving Oakhaven. She untied the strings and poured the contents into her palm. It was the silver royal crest ring. Cassian had sent Elias to retrieve it from the safe, and somehow Cale had intercepted it during his tracking. Cassian's eyes widened in horror. Don't. I, Elena Lisa Thorne. She spoke the words clearly, her voice echoing with absolute, terrifying finality. She wasn't using magic. She was using the sheer, undeniable force of her own human willpower. Do formally and eternally rejected Cassian of the Northern Pack as my mate. I reject his claim. I reject his protection. I reject his heart. She threw the heavy silver ring through the chain-link fence. It struck Cassian square in the chest and dropped into the deep, churning mud at his knees. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. Cassian let out a blood-curdling scream, collapsing entirely into the mud. He clutched his chest, his body convulsing as the universe acknowledged the absolute, irreversible death of the soul tether. The phantom tether didn't just snap. It dissolved into ash. Behind him, the Northern Vanguard shifted uncomfortably. They felt the shockwave of the rejection. They smelled the decay of their alpha's spirit. A king rejected by his true mate was a bad omen. A king rejected because of his own dishonor was a tragedy that broke the loyalty of his men. Elias, standing a few yards back, lowered his head, unable to look at his broken leader. Take your king and go home, Elias, Silas called out, his voice devoid of its usual mockery. Even the Southern Alpha recognized the gravity of what had just occurred. If your army takes one more step, we will end him. But I think he suffered enough. Elias stepped forward, gesturing for 2 large guards to assist him. They hauled Cassian out of the mud. The Alpha King didn't fight them. His eyes were vacant, his golden irises dull and lifeless. He looked back at Lisa one last time, an empty husk of the arrogant ruler he had been. "Goodbye, Cassian," Lisa whispered. She turned her back on the fence. She didn't look back as the northern army slowly retreated into the fog, carrying their ruined king. She walked past Kale, past Alpha Silas, and headed straight toward the southern compound's motor pool. There was a transmission on a patrol truck that needed rebuilding, and she had work to do. Lisa's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't measured by magical bloodlines, crowns, or physical dominance. It is measured by the courage to walk away from a table where respect is no longer being served. Cassian learned too late that a crown is worthless if you have to trade your soul and your true mate to keep it. Lisa didn't need a pack to find her worth. She found it in the grease, the grit, and the unwavering boundary of her own self-respect. If you enjoyed this cinematic tale of heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimate empowerment, please like, share, and subscribe to support more stories like this. Let me know in the comments whose side you were on. Did Cassian get what he deserved?